When an elderly woman with a glaring black eye shuffled into the motorcycle clubhouse, the room went quiet like someone had put a hand over a radio. The light from the filament bulbs hit the bruise in a way that made it look almost blue. The smell of oil and old leather filled the air, and a radio hummed a low country song in the corner. She clutched a frayed grocery bag, folded a paper under her chin, and said to the men and women around the table with a voice that wobbled but did not break, "Please, can you save my grandson?" In 2 sentences, the impossible had been asked, and a promise began to take shape. What followed would change not only one boy, but a neighborhood and the lives of 32 strangers who would call themselves family. The obstacle was clear from the start. The boy lived with a man who hid behind closed doors, and the school had started to make him stand in presentations that he could not survive. On Friday morning, 32 motorcycles would roll up to the elementary school, and nothing about that day would be ordinary. This is a story about chosen family protection and the odd people who answer when someone calls for help. The clubhouse smelled like engine grease, coffee, and menthol cigarettes. The gang room was a collage of patched jackets, sun-faded flags, and a chalkboard with names for rides. Tony, the chapter president, with a scar on his knuckle and a baritone laugh, lifted his head. Maria, the grandmother, stood rigid by the door, while Raoul, the vice president, rinsed a coffee cup, and Denise, the younger patch coordinator, folded a blanket. Each face showed a memory triggered by the woman, motivation that looked like a relic of someone else's life. Tony squinted at the paper she held, the teacher's note, small and clean, with the assignment underlined, "Please bring someone from your life to career day." There was an awkward silence. Then Maria, a lifetime mechanic and the one who mended broken things, said softly, "Where is he?" Maria answered, "The boy's name was Lucas. He was 10, and he had a bruise on the same cheek as hers that morning." The room filled with the sharp, metallic laugh of a man who had seen worse, and the slow nods of people who had been pulled into care by accident more than design. The jacket of an older member, Tom, was folded across his knee like a shield. Tony pushed his chair back, the scrape on the floor a small punctuation, and said, "Let's stop talking. Tell me everything." The space opened into listening. The conversation moved from small mercy to logistics, the voices layering like different instruments, an engine being tuned. Lucas's backstory came out in fragments across 3 conversations and a stack of smudged school notes. He had been born under a fluorescent kitchen light in a shelter where Maria had been sleeping on a cot because rent had turned into a monthly math problem she could not solve. The first paragraph of his life was practical and raw. His father was on a work roster that never let him see daylight, and his mother left when he was still in diapers and found day shifts in a factory 2 counties over. The second paragraph held the small humiliations of school lunchroom rumors and shoes that leaked when it rained. He had learned to make himself small to survive. The third paragraph held the secret Lucas carried like a stone under his tongue, the feeling that the world would be safer if he could disappear. The fourth paragraph was a single bright line, an old woman who showed up at different bus stop corners, who had once been his neighbor and called him by a name that made him look up. Maria had kept him on odd afternoons, fed him stew, and read to him from a book with pictures of ships. That is how he learned what steady hands felt like. Those paragraphs together made him a boy whose courage had been worn thin but not gone, who would ask for something that felt ridiculous and change everything. Tony's backstory also came out in 3 paragraphs later at night by a grill where smoke pulled at the ceiling and guitars hummed. He had been a kid who left a small town with a suitcase and no plan and found himself in a parade of bad jobs and better friends. The second paragraph showed how he had once been a mentor in a youth program that taught kids to fix bikes, and he had kept a photograph of those children in his wallet for 15 years. The third paragraph was about a promise he had made to someone who had died in his arms that he would never let a child feel alone again. Those stories were not asked for. They were given freely, the way people hand over tools when hands are steady and the work looks hard. By the time Maria finished the last sentence, Tony's jaw had set with the kind of firmness that meant plans were already in motion. When Maria finally asked the room, she did not say, "Save my grandson," like a speech. She said it small and raw, as if it could be tucked away. "Please save my grandson, because they will make him stand at school and they will laugh." Conversation turned to logistics, and the tone shifted into action. Denise set dates, Raoul called mothers at the homework table, Tom drove to the school for maps, and Tony made a short list of requirements: shoes, a shirt, notes from the teacher. They argued quietly over who would drive, how many could show, who would speak at the assembly, and who would simply stand in the doors and look like the answer to a child's prayer. The group vote was not formal, but it felt like a legal document drafted in goodwill. Everyone spoke, and the room practiced a kind of promise. "I will be there," said Miguel, tightening his gloves. "I will be at the door," said Leela. "I will talk if you want," said Teresa. That exchange grew into plans for Friday. 10 people, then 20, then 32 names were written on the chalkboard and circled. The decision was a small ritual, a clasping of hands in a place that had known better afternoons. There was laughter, too, the kind that helps people breathe, and small jokes about matching bandanas. The commitment was complete. They would show up and they would protect. If you are feeling the weight of what this child had been carrying, you are not alone. If this moment tastes like a quicksilver mix of anger and hope, then sit with that a second and know that many people do too. Have you ever seen a stranger arrive and become the person who saved the day? Share a moment like that with us. Start your comment with "when someone showed up" and tell us 2 lines about what they did. Your stories matter because they tell others that help exists and because they teach us how to be brave in small public ways. Commenting helps other readers see that protection can come from unexpected places, and your voice could be the reason someone else decides to answer a call. Now let's go back to Lucas and the day the motorcycles pulled up to the school, because what follows is about public theater and private courage, and we want you to see both. Friday arrived with a sky the color of cheap ink and the school steps covered in frost. The rumble of engines came before anyone saw them. 32 bikes in staggered formation, their chrome catching pale light. The sight made the kids in the playground stop mid-kickball, and the teachers at the door straighten. Tony rode in the front, his jacket clipped with a small metal patch that read "Family." Behind him rolled Raoul, Leela, Miguel, Teresa, and 26 others, some older, some younger, some with hands that shook the way old trees shake. The sensory swell of that arrival was huge. The sound of engines, a low tide of noise. The smell of gasoline and wet leather sharp. The sight of helmets and jackets like an army in thrift store armor. The touch of cold metal gripping handlebars, and the taste in the air of something electric like a winter storm before lightning. The plan was simple: get Lucas through career day with dignity and remove the chance of public humiliation. Denise stood at the front, adjusting a scarf, and when the group formed in the school corridor, heads turned and whispers began. The dialogue at the entrance between the bikers, the principal, the teachers, and kids stretched across 9 exchanges. Tony said, "Good
Morning. I am Tony, and we are here as guests." Principal Harris said, "This is highly irregular, and we have rules about visitors." Tony replied, "We are here for a boy who needs room to stand and not be judged." Denise added, "He will have someone to introduce him, and that someone will be respected." Principal Harris argued, "These are motorcycles, and we have safety policies." Raoul said, "We will leave the bikes outside and go through the proper door." Teacher Denise said, "Lucas has been anxious, and we want to make sure he is safe today." Lila stepped forward. "I will sit in the front row, and if anyone laughs, I will stand up." Miguel whispered to a student, "Come on, kid, you're with us." A teacher whispered to Lucas, "You can do this with them here." Lucas looked at Maria and said, "Are you really doing this?" Maria squeezed his hand and said, "Yes." That series of short exchanges built a tension that felt like a tight wire, and then a release when the gym doors opened and 32 pairs of eyes met the rows of children. Inside the gym, the sensory score shifted. Extra bright lights smelled of disinfectant and lunch trays. There was the metallic clang of a microphone, and the texture of paper programs passed from hands to hands. Lucas was led to the microphone by Teresa, who had taken to holding the program like a talisman. There were 4 to 5 descriptions of the moment. All around the stage, the rasp of a throat before speaking, the way the carpet bit into sneakers, the hidden chill of air vents, and the rustle of jackets as people shifted. Tony had arranged for a simple talk about life skills and pride. The bikers did not speak as a gag. They spoke as people with stories. Tony talked about work and commitment, not crime, and his voice had a warm roughness that came from years of yelling over wind and engines. He handed Lucas a small folded note and told him to read, but when Lucas looked down, his hands trembled. Miguel leaned in and said, "You got this." Denise said, "Breathe." Lucas read about his love for drawing and how he wanted to be an engineer who fixed broken things, and the gym held its breath. Laughter did not come. Instead, there was a standing room hush and a slow clap that felt like someone washing a wound clean. Cameras flashed, little kids whispered, and even the kids who had once mocked him looked off at their shoes. The reaction from the antagonist who had bullied at home did not have the courage to show up. The school superintendent later said in a short interview that the scene had changed the tone of the school and that policy discussions would follow. The days that followed were quieter, but no less important. Bonding happened in the small routines, the scrapes that showed care. Tony taught Lucas basic wrench work on an old bicycle in a garage while the smell of oil and hot metal mixed with the sweetness of orange soda from foam cups. Teresa brought lunch and taught Lucas how to make a sandwich like a ritual, the taste of mayonnaise and tomato becoming a comfort. Leela took him to the library and smelt of lavender as she showed him how to stack books. Miguel practiced reading with him aloud, and the tactile sound of pages became a new rhythm. There were 4 to 5 sensory details in every scene: the roughness of a work glove, the stickiness of jam on fingers, the squeak of a bicycle chain, the warmth of a jacket draped over small shoulders, and the faint perfume of a volunteer who always wore cinnamon. Conversations in these scenes were plentiful, 8 to 10 exchanges in the garage, the kitchen, and the library, each one serving to show the deepening of trust. Lucas said, "I'm scared." Tony said, "That's okay, we're here." Lucas asked, "Will you stay?" Raul said, "We're not going anywhere." Maria asked, "Are you hungry?" Teresa said, "Always." The repetition of small acts built a scaffolding of safety around a boy who had been figuring out how to breathe in the open. Tension returned 2 weeks later when a neighbor recorded an incident on a phone, and the footage found its way into the hands of the school counselor. 2 paragraphs of concentrated pressure described how the man who had been Lucas's guardian confronted Tony in the street and accused him of interfering. The first paragraph showed the first rising heat that day, the shout, the slam of a truck door, the smell of rain on asphalt, and the thud of fist against chest. The second paragraph was the legal pressure the community felt when they had to collect witness statements, true proof photographs of bruises, a doctor's note, and the teacher's testimony that the boy had been withdrawn. Those 300 words of tension forced a choice on everyone involved, and the bikers agreed to hand evidence to Officer Ramirez, led by Raul and Tony. There were choices to be made about escalation. The man was confronted in a town hall meeting with witnesses and proof, and he broke down and chose to enter counseling rather than prison, partly because he could not face the public weight of people testifying, and because the community offered a path to repair. The process of repair and reconciliation was patient and sometimes messy. The man who had hit was named Daniel, and in early meetings he met Maria in a room where the light was low and the chairs were placed in a circle. The first conversations were thin apologies and an explanation coated with shame. The next set of gatherings involved therapy offered by a local nonprofit, coordinated by social worker Jasmine. There were days when Daniel refused to speak, and
days where he would read a paragraph from a booklet and leave the room in tears. Part of the repair required concrete acts. He agreed to undergo counseling, attend parenting classes, and sign an agreement that he would not live with Lucas until evaluated by a court. Tony and Raul, along with Denise and Teresa, agreed to mentor and check in, and to sign an understanding for school personnel. The antagonist's arc showed a difficult pivot, not a miracle transformation, but a steady movement toward accountability, aided by witnesses Maria, the counselor, Officer Ramirez, the principal, and a community that demanded proof and offered tools for change. The scar on Maria's eye faded, and she began to volunteer in the school cafeteria as a way to be present with Lucas and others. She named each kid she met like a hymn. 1 month later, Lucas had a different sort of morning. He walked to school with a jacket that had a small patch sewn inside reading "Chosen Brother," and he held Maria's hand. The neighborhood felt softer, the way wind feels when it moves through new leaves. 3 months later, there was a small ceremony at the clubhouse, where the chapter gave Lucas a worn helmet that fit his small head like an artifact, and Tony pinned a tiny badge on his shirt. Photographs captured the moment. Nurse Abby, the school counselor Jasmine, and Principal Harris stood by, and a local reporter wrote about how a non-traditional community had stepped up. 6 months after that, the chapter had helped establish a mentorship program at the school, with Tom leading a weekend bike repair workshop, Miguel teaching reading circles, Denise coordinating volunteers, and Leela organizing snacks. The piece of paper that had started all this, the teacher's assignment, was framed in the clubhouse, and Maria kept it behind the bar like a relic. Lucas had improved in his grades, stopped flinching when doors closed, and most importantly, smiled without effort. The community had learned to watch for small cracks and fill them. A short legal change at the school made visitor policies more flexible in cases of community protection, and the nonprofit that had ran Daniel's counseling began a pilot to bridge families and community groups. In the end, he had arrived asking for 1 day and had received constancy. He began as a boy who hid his hands and ended wearing a patch that said "Brother." Maria kept that helmet in the living room like a medal, and Tony texted her on Sundays with photos of repair projects and jokes. The nurse Abby said the hallway felt different, the way light fills a room that has been cleaned. And Principal Harris admitted she had learned the hard way that policy without compassion is brittle. The community proved that law and paperwork were important, but that human presence can accelerate repair when paired with evidence and accountability. If this story moved you, share a moment when
someone appeared for you. If you want more videos about communities stepping in to protect their own, subscribe and be part of a space that values action over indifference. Remember the simple promise Maria made when she first walked into the clubhouse. Appear when people need you. It is a small thing that can change a life.